Well, I wanted to see Natalie and Thomas's face whenever I put this up this morning, because that truly is our journey to the Holy Land. The back side of the little screen that was in front of us as we traveled. We left Houston at 3:45 p.m. on May 27th. And when we got to Frankfurt, Germany, we'd been 5,226 miles, and we knew it. So we got to Germany about 9:45 a.m., and it was an 8-hour time difference, so our internal clocks felt like it was way later, but trust me, at the Frankfurt airport, there's no time to stop. We did find out a little bit about security there, because we had to go through it 3 times just to get food to eat. So that was at the Frankfurt airport. We left there at 3:15 after a 5.5-hour layover, and we finally arrived in Tel Aviv at 8:15 p.m. That following day on May 28th, we got on a shuttle, met up with Signature Tours, which, by the way, I'll plug them real quick because they were fantastic. If you get ready to go anywhere in the world, call Signature Tours, because they were absolutely fabulous. Scanned our passports, made it through custom, and off to the bus we went to meet George. And George helped us as we were on our journey throughout the week. He is a Christian, was raised in a Christian home. He is Syriac Orthodox, and he worked for the U.S. Embassy under 2 presidents. Is it still working?
No.
Battery went out. We got to leave it later on. Worked for 2 presidents, and was in America long enough that he could have his U.S. citizenship if he chose to, but he and his family still reside in Jerusalem today, and this is what he does. He had to go to a 2-year course, right?
Yes.
A 2-year course there at the University of Jerusalem to just be a tour guide, to learn all of the historical things there, and of course the things that we learned. It was at this point, or somewhere along this point, that George told us that there are 9 million people who live in Israel, and only 125,000 of them are Christians.
Wow.
And Muslim is the largest religion there. From there, we traveled to Netanya. That blue water that you see is the Mediterranean. And that's what it looked like when we got there. Netanya.
Okay.
And that's what it looked like when we arrived. And when we got up the next morning, that was our view.
Wow.
An interesting fact about Netanya is it's a very clean local beach town, and it was established in 1950. And the man who the town is named after is Nathan Strauss, and he owns Macy's department stores. And 65% of the world's diamonds are collected and cleaned in Israel, and most of them are found right there in Netanya. Russian immigrants reside there, and there is lots of industry. George also told us that Israel is number 3 in technology in the world. And a lot of the major technology corporations have their businesses there, but of course it's right there at the Mediterranean and easy access. So off we go. May 28th, that morning, Caesarea Maritima, or Maritime, however they say it, at Caesarea National Park, and my GPS on my picture said it was in the Haifa district in Israel. So before I start showing you these, I'll just tell you this was built by Herod the Great, and George said they call him Herod the Crazy. And he wanted to keep Jews at harbor there, and so he wanted to tell them, I am the king. And he didn't want problems for the Roman Empire, so he expanded the temple on into Jerusalem. But he built this harbor that we're going to be looking at in 24 BC, wanting to make money. This is the theater as you walk in. And then on the right-hand side, just above the blue chairs, are original seats from 24 BC. They think that wasn't phenomenal to walk through and think about how old that was. Here are some columns and pillar tops. If I could have shown pictures just from here for an hour, really. But here's the bay, and then that little peninsula it shoots out was where his palace went out into the water. And this is remnants of Herod's palace that was there as an offshoot out into the Mediterranean. And then this has just been claimed within the past months, I believe March, if I remember right. And this was uncovered beneath, and you can see those columns in the back. This was beneath Herod's palace and is believed to be the prison where Paul was kept for 2 years. Researchers believe that this was where he is imprisoned according to the New Testament. And so that was just phenomenal to stand there and listen to George talk to us about the journeys of the people that have gone before him that are the Christians. And he literally told us, please come back, because the tourism is what keeps Christianity alive there, because number one, it's industry for them, because the businesses that we went to were Christian, and then it also is spreading the gospel as well. What you see here are, anybody want to guess what those are? Aqueducts. And they carried water from the Jordan to Herod's palace. And you can see up at the top the trench, and then how far it extends down the beach. One thing, a side note, that everywhere we went, even as we passed down the road, George would say, you see those aqueducts coming up from the mountains and trailing down, leading down here to this village where they live? It became so clear to me why Jesus used the reference, I am the living water. Because they were constantly seeking water for life. But he said he is the living water that will never stop flowing, because he is omnipresent and will be with us always. So our first big journey, our second big journey after Herod's palace, was Mount Carmel. And as we were traveling up the mountain, we passed through Druze villages, D-R-U-Z-E. And they're not Muslim, and they're not Jews, they're Druze. And this group lives in the Carmel Heights, and they were really good at defending with the Israelis. They have the book of wisdom and worship Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And they pray in the suite. Those who are prayed are known as the wise men, and those who don't are known as the ignorant ones. You cannot convert to or become a Drew. And any Drew who wants to leave will be excommunicated, and they have 2 big rules: no alcohol and no divorce. Was what George told us. There's 1.6 million of them in the world, and 145,000 live there at Carmel. So 145,000 Druze live in that one mountain village, but only 125 Christians throughout the entire nation of Israel. So as we get to Mount Carmel, on the right-hand side is a statue that represents Elijah as he confronted Ahab and challenged the priests of Baal to call upon their gods. And then we know that Elijah's God still lives today and won that battle. Amen? Then on the left-hand side is the synagogue there where the Druze would meet, and there's that synagogue. There's a view from upstairs with the synagogue. And if you were here last week, I mentioned the Jezreel Valley. That's looking out onto the Jezreel Valley, also known as where the Battle of Armageddon will be fought. And of course, this is where Elijah challenged those prophets. And I was able to put those pictures together, but there is just absolutely no way to understand the mass, the size of that Jezreel Valley. And then after we were on Mount Carmel, we traveled around to the other side of the Jezreel Valley and went to the Mount of Precipice. And this is an opposite view of that valley. And you can see how lush and green it is down there. This was beautiful. beautiful agriculture land. And this tells us that the Mount of Precipice is also known as the Leaping Mountain. According to old tradition, Jesus jumped from this mountain when fleeing his pursuers. And then at the base of this mountain, they found remains that were 8,000 to 10,000 years old. This is Mike that went with us on our trip, and he took a guitar with him that was given to him by someone in Austin. It's a foldable guitar, and it carries like a backpack, and he wanted to gift that to someone, bless someone with it while he was on the journey. And so that company in Austin gave him pretty much the most expensive travel guitar that you could possibly find, and he blessed us there with music. Then as we turn around, behind us was the city of Nazareth. And then in a distance, that is not Nazareth, it's another village that's down in the valley, but that is the Mount of Transfiguration, and was the mountain where Jesus ascended into heaven. And last week I got very emotional because I said all I wanted to do was to be able to get across that valley and just touch the last place that Jesus was on earth before he ascended into heaven, but it was 18 miles away, so you can tell how very large that would have been. Now you're going to notice it's going to take me a while to get through these days, because when I tell you it was pillar to post, it was hang on, we're going. So after we finished there, we headed over to the Sea of Galilee and Tiberias in the northern district of Israel, and it was beautiful. That was morning. You can see that boat in the back. Every hotel we stayed in had this fabulous buffet, and there was salad for breakfast, there was salad for lunch, and there was salad for supper, and I began to understand what a true Mediterranean diet is. But there was lots of meats, lots of salads, and fresh vegetables. I think my favorite little salad was pickled beets with pickled apples. They put the beets and apples together and pickled them, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And I put this side note in there because we worshiped together as a group, 32 of us, for the first time that evening in a hotel meeting room. And there was so much power in that room that people were coming out of the rooms around us and just walking in the door to see what was going on. Regardless if we were in prayer for each other, for the trip, for back home, for what God was going to do for each one of us as we were on that journey, but that set the tone for the entire trip, and it was because we put God first. So here we are the next morning on the road to Teldon. And this is the most, I can't think of the word, but the best agriculture in the northern side of Israel, there in Tel Aviv. You can see how rich that soil is. And just crops as far as you could see, lots of water, irrigation. And on your left-hand side, I wanted to show that video so bad, but that's a rushing water stream. And it was just absolutely beautiful.
It is.
As we entered there in the Teldon National Reserve, and lots of things happened.
It's loud.
Oh yes, it was very loud. But thank the Lord, most of it was shaded. Because I don't really know, we probably walked what seemed like 5 miles in there, but it probably was only about half a mile, but most of it was uphill both ways. So that's no lie. We walked through this Teldon forest where we saw the Israelite gate where Solomon would have sat with the elders. This was beautiful inside there. And then the entrance gate to Dan from the time of the Israelite kingdom. And this is where Solomon would have sat with the elders, here at the entrance. And then we continued on through Dan to a place of sacrifice.
which they're just pits, place of sacrifice. And then this is a pagan worship ground. We didn't stay there long. But then we went on out and we sat there and thought, wow, this is gorgeous land. And then all of a sudden George says, yeah, it's beautiful. There's Israeli flag, Jordanian flag. And then he tells us, or Lebanon, you're sitting in Israel, and in that same field to the right is Syria, and to the left is Lebanon. And I guess we sat there for a good 10, 15 minutes just taking that in. Because you could literally tell the difference in the landscape. Because Lebanon, there was a village. Israel was just open land, and then Syria is where that mountain was back there in the back. Let's see. Oh, yes. Yes, and as we made our way down, because everything was rock, of course, as we traveled through there. And this is Abraham's Gate, and it's named Abraham's Gate because in Genesis 13 and 14, this is when Abraham traveled to Dan to go rescue his nephew Lot. And this would have been the gate that he went through there. And then also this sign was there, the Canaanite gate, or the gate of the three arches was nearby. And then there was Caesarea Philippi. Absolutely gorgeous. And the water that you see there are streams that flow from the Jordan. And it was crystal clear and ice cold. No, we did drink it, cannot drink it. I said, oops. But interestingly enough, George was telling us all the things here that everything he had scripture to back up, and he knew the biblical stories where we were at. And we thanked him so much. It was not about Israel, it was about Jesus and his ministry, and the entire story was. A couple of things here. Just behind this area is the road to Damascus. How marvelous is that? Where Jesus then talked to Peter here. George said it would have been about here, to where he said, on this rock I will build my church. These Hermon River springs are the ones that flow from the Jordan. And that is clear water that's rock bed that you can see there. Again, this is, okay. This is that sanctuary that's in the back. Was this in Magdalene?
That's the gates of hell.
That's right.
When he said, Peter, I'll build this church, and he said, and the gates of hell, that was an actual cave where they did demonic human sacrifices, and at that time, they considered that to be, the gates of hell.
Right. And so there we are climbing to the gates of hell. And I'm telling you, it was so hot that day. It was so hot. But this is looking down. I wish I don't have a red button, but that's a mosaic floor of that sanctuary from way back then, thousands of years ago. Can you tell where the mosaic is? There's me standing in the gates of hell. But the sanctuary of Pan, which would have been the god there that they were worshiping. This is as we were traveling back down. And then Dad Lee took that picture of me with the water flowing from the Jordan and the scene there behind us. Just a side note on some things we did see while we were there. No explanation needed. This is Drew's food. And it was very interesting. It was absolutely delicious. This was a little side journey that we got to take. Hey, Sharon Nolan. Chime in whenever you hear something. This is from the Sea of Galilee, and if you could take a mud bath in that, it would be absolutely wonderful, but it's not mud. This gentleman has found the technology and the smarts to use every piece of the olive, because after the olive oil is extracted, there's black water left. And so he has used the pits and all the black water off to make these skin cares that he sells worldwide. This was one of my favorite visits, was Capernaum and the town of Jesus. We walked and sat for a very long time, just looking out onto the Sea of Galilee, knowing that Jesus may have sat in that very same spot.
Yeah.
This is the church of Peter. And whenever churches were built, they did not destroy what was there. So you would have a Byzantine church built on top, or Crusader church built on top of a Byzantine, a Roman church built on top, and then you would have more of the modern day churches. So those, sometimes the levels of those churches go 4 and 5 layers deep, if not even more. But they do have this, what you see at the top there is the church that's there now above the church of St. Peter. And they still have mass there. And then this was the white synagogue, or the synagogue of Jesus. And I don't know if it was Thomas or if it was someone else who said, on the right-hand side there, you see that entryway, that may have actually been where Jesus walked through to enter into that synagogue. And as we traveled around and looked, you're just so well aware of the architecture of the day, and it takes you back to that time. And we were just in awe. And then notice this is the same day. And then we were off to Magdala, which is the home of Mary Magdalene. And so it's way too much that I could say. I'm just going to go ahead and put these slides out there, and if you guys who went think of something, to let me know. But this town's been recently discovered more so than the other things that we saw. But they're still uncovering. Look, there's those aqueducts again, and then the baths. Again, it was so real as to why Jesus called himself the living water. This, everywhere you go, there is a modern church that's built on these ruins or beside these ruins. And the acoustics in these churches are just absolutely unbelievable. When we were here, we sang, "Let us become more aware of His presence," and it just...
That's the church that has the pillars for the different women of the Bible.
Yes, and I... Say it again so they can hear you.
This church has pillars. Champions of the faith are written on each one of the pillars, and then they have a pillar that's empty. And George so eloquently explained that it's empty so that you can write your name on that pillar.
Wow.
And be a champion for Christ.
And I did not show, there was way too many pictures to show, but it's just absolutely gorgeous. This is an offset. You can see all of us in prayer there, but being the worship leader that I am, I was, taking a picture. But this was the hem of his garment and the story of how that would have happened there when the lady or the gentleman reached out and said, "Just let me touch the hem of his garment." And this is inside the church overseeing the Sea of Galilee, and it's called Peter's Church. And then off to the next morning, and we're walking out on the pier to get onto that. Remember I showed you, look at that boat that's out in the water. The gentleman, Mike, that had the guitar earlier, that was standing out looking at the Sea of at the Valley of Jezreel, they let him raise that American Israeli flag combination there that morning. It was just amazing. That was his wife there. Sharon and I stood and looked out on that majesty. It was just absolutely breathtaking to be out in the middle of that Sea of Galilee, and think about when he said, "Peace, be still." There's so many things that happen in Galilee. Jesus walked on the water there. He calmed the raging waves. He led Peter and the other fishermen to cast their nets again on the other side. Their nets tore, And the boats were rushing to and fro, and this one was interesting. I forgot it was even a story, but it's there in the Bible. They needed money for taxes, and so Jesus told them, go fish again. And so when the fish came up, the fish had coins in their mouths. And so they were able to go and pay their taxes. And then we were at the Mount of Beatitudes, and most of you probably know some things about the Mount of the Beatitudes. But Jesus taught the parables there, and it was in the Bay of the Parables. And I did not put that picture in there because I couldn't remember, I didn't know why, because which one it was. But this is at the top of an amphitheater. And the landscape, the way God made that, to where Jesus could go and speak, he could be heard by 7,000 people at one time because of the way that amphitheater is natural landscape, the natural landscape of an amphitheater. Matthew 5-7, Jesus preached from the Mount of the Beatitudes atop of that amphitheater landscape. Every day there was a different one of us that took the story from the Bible and shared what God had given us we did a Bible study at each one of these locations that I've been talking to you about. But when we were at the Mount of Beatitudes, people would stop. Jill Hurst was leading, and one lady said, I don't know what's going on here, but can I take a picture? And the Holy Spirit was so thick with us, it was just like we had these ropes tied to each other so that we were bungee together. It was just absolutely fabulous. This is the church there at the Mount of Beatitudes. And then we went to the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter. And we were able to walk down to the Sea of Galilee there. And then we went over to the Church of the Fishes and Loaves. And we were actually amazed that gentleman that's sitting in the middle of the floor is restoring those mosaics. Tediously restoring those mosaics. And then those are baptismals outside the church. And then on to, say it. Bet Sean. I was so glad when they were coming. Bet Sean National Park. And 6,000 BC. Wow. And you're standing there thinking, that's staged. There's no way that can be that beautiful. But just, those are ancient Roman streets with the pillars and the passageways. And it was just magnificent. That mountain in the back, some of them climbed it. Neither one of you did you? But some of them went up to the top, and that was where Abraham. I'm lying, I ain't gonna tell that story. Okay, but inside, it was a temple. It was a temple. Yeah. But this is another set of ancient Roman theaters. And this is a Roman bathhouse. And you wouldn't sit on those little things. That would be heated, that would be filled with water, and then they would have a platform on top of them, and you could go over to a steam room, or you could go over to the warm bath, or you could go to the hot bath, wherever you wanted to go. But isn't that just incredible?
That is. I take the hot one.
Right? And they did say that every evening they gathered there. Every evening they gathered there. And that's Brother Stan and Debbie and myself in the shade, because that had been a long day. Ooh, a long day.
I know y'all were exhausted.
And then, so we're traveling the road. It's been a long day. Thank the Lord we're in an air-conditioned bus. We go through this tunnel. We come out of the tunnel, and then boom, there's Jerusalem.
Wow.
You can see the Temple Mount to the far right. That'd be your left, I guess. That's one picture. It looks like it's pieced together, but it's one picture. Then the next morning we get up and go to Bethlehem. I don't know what I was expecting in Bethlehem, but it was not what I got in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is under Palestinian rule, and it was very different, very different. That's Jill in the little hole there that leads into the Nativity Church. Make sure it was beside me when I took that picture. But this was absolutely phenomenal. And we stood there, what, 2 hours? Waiting to go down into the cave to where Jesus was born. Because we are in Bethlehem, right?
Yeah.
So since Joseph was from Bethlehem and Mary was engaged, they had to go back to Bethlehem to pay their taxes. When they arrived, the town was full of people and the inns were full. They found this cave, and this is where it is believed that Mary gave birth. Here Joseph had the vision to take the family to Egypt, and that was where the Magi ended up finding them. And then from Egypt they came back to Nazareth. This church has changed hands through the wars and conquests since 335 AD. It was destroyed in 526 by the Samaritans, then it was rebuilt by the Justinians, and then it remains the same today. And I tell you this because think about America's birthday is in 2 days, and how old will we be? 270? In the year 1099, that big room was finished. And then the Curtis Muslim dynasty destroyed some of the churches, but they saved that one because it had high importance. It fell into the hands of the Jordanians. In 1968, Israel took it over, but then Palestine got it back in 1994 and still manages it today. And in 2002, 40 Palestinian government officials ran from the Israeli government and took refuge there, and there was nothing they could do because they couldn't go in. Interestingly enough, during the pandemic, there were no tours. And so the tour guides took the time to go to this church and refresh the memories. And you can see at the top of those pillars, the inscriptions and the paintings. That was uncovered during the pandemic. They did not know it was there until they cleaned up those columns. And the mosaics at the top. And then, of course, they entered that cross to your left. During one of the wars, they filled those columns with bees and left those holes there so the bees would come out and help them conquer the people that came in. And then on your right, that's an inscription that was also uncovered during the pandemic. Now, this is going down into the cave. It wasn't a stampede, but it felt like it at times. And then this is how they've commemorated the place, the actual birthplace to where it would have been. And I was so disappointed because George said they actually took the manger, they cut out the manger itself and moved it over here. And I went and sat in there for a really long time. Because y'all know me, I was a virtual member. I sat there for a really long time and took a picture and it didn't come out. But that's okay because my memory's there. But Jerome lived here for 40 years, and he is the gentleman that translated the Bible from Greek to Latin. And that is his burial place, but his body has been moved. This are tombs that represent the massacre of the infant babies. This was an underground church. And these were the shepherd's fields. I know, it wasn't the most it wasn't the most beautiful or the place that had been so fantasized, but this is the shepherd's field where the angel appeared and told them about the birth of Jesus. It still just gives me chills.
Had such a different feel than the church.
Yes.
That is.
And that's a good side note because, there were times where we'd come to places and we'd be like, yeah, right. That's where that happened. But then there would be some times when you would stand there and the Holy Spirit would just be so thick that you knew you were standing in the presence of God Almighty Himself and where Jesus had been. So I know that is where.
There were some things I didn't know, of course, a million during the whole trip, but I didn't know that the shepherds that were tending their flocks, every one of their sheep were sacrificial lambs that were slated to be sacrificed in Jerusalem. And then they left there and went to see the end sacrifice. And also, those fields we're seeing there, those were Boaz's fields. So Ruth and Naomi, when they were coming up, those would have been the fields that they saw. So everything had a, stacked up. Earlier, which used accessory of Philippi, right over there is where David gathered the 5 stones to slay Goliath.
That's right.
So it's all just stacked on because, it's a very small land area, very small. And it's just, things after things after things all happen in the same area.
Yeah, it's just, I want y'all to chime in. There's just so much that we heard, and I was steadily trying to, my phones were just going fast as I could possibly go to keep up with what was being said, then I got smart and turned on the recorder. But this is the Church of the Shepherd's Fields. It was the most dynamic church, I think, that we went into. It was the smallest of these churches that they still have worship in, but I would like for Danny Lee and Thomas to come if you would. We're going to sing It Is Well With My Soul. And I do have a ways to go. If we need to, we will continue, but maybe we can go a little faster.
I love that song.
We sang this a cappella when we were there, and the voices were just dynamic. Sharon, you want to do it with us? Okay. Thank you all very much. And Mike, the music leader at the Cowboy Church, had something ready for every okay, as I was going through, this is kind of a polar opposite, but that is the entrance to the Garden of Gethsemane, and they put a street straight down the middle of the garden. That is also a Muslim mosque tower for the call to prayer. You can hear them at every hotel and everywhere we were. But this is inside the Garden of Gethsemane. We sat and heard a wonderful Bible study there and walked through this Garden of Gethsemane. This is Dana Lee and Thomas praying. We were all able to go and just find a place to pray. I don't know if I even spoke a word, because when I walked into the Garden of Gethsemane, the overwhelming feeling of grief just took me over. And I said, Lord, what is this? I could not come up with what the feeling it was, but it was the death of a brother. My brother Jesus, who died on the cross for my sins. That's where he went to pray. This was the last place he prayed. Father, let this cup pass from me if you're so willing. But the lady who gave our the Bible study there said, Jesus found them sleeping twice. He urged them to pray so they wouldn't fall into temptation. And Jesus didn't pray for himself. He prayed for them. He prayed so that they would not fall into temptation. And then he said, Lord, if it's your will, let this cup pass. And Psalm 75 and Isaiah 41, it's the cup of wrath. And it's for the shared blood of sinners. But the cup he dreaded the most was that God would forsake him.
Right.
Because he had to turn his back on him because he was alone when he died on the cross. He had to do it by himself. And so that was very powerful, very, very, very powerful. The rest of it we are going to get through. So there's Garden of Gethsemane. The Church of Agony is there at the Garden of Gethsemane. Inside of it are lots of purples because of the color of agony. On the left is a rock, and I don't know who took this picture of me. And then that is Brother Lynn directly across from me. And later on, Brother Lynn said, did anybody else touch the rock? This is the rock that Jesus would have prayed on. There in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I said, yes, I did. He said, did you feel anything? I said, I felt a magnetic pull. And he said, I absolutely did too. I was so drawn to that rock that I just absolutely could not let go. This is a view of the Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives. What you see in the forefront there are 80,000 Jewish graves. It's the largest cemetery in the world. And it's looking down at the eastern gate where we know Jesus is going to come back from. The Muslims have closed it up so Jesus can't get through. And then in front of that gate, they have Muslim cemeteries to keep it unclean so that he won't come back. We just said, okay.
Right.
This is our group of 32.
Wow.
I did not do this. Bree said, please tell me my mom rode a camel. No, she did not. And then we went on to Masada, and that is the Dead Sea.
Wow.
I'm going to hurry, guys. It's a lot. We rode cable cars up to, this is another of Herod's palaces. Many thousand feet up. You can see the Dead Sea there in the background. All the different rooms of the palace that was up there. Again, water travels. Cable cars down. And then we went to the Dead Sea. It's Kara helping me get in the water when it's 110 degrees. There I am, right in the middle. Hey, don't tell the story. Y'all do not tell the story. Do not tell the story. I finally floated. But there's our little chain that we made in the water. We had a really good time. Then we went to Old City, Jerusalem on June 3rd. Those are ancient walls. You can tell the difference in the size of the stones, and that's the different ages of those empires that would have built the walls of Jerusalem. We entered through the Lion's Gate into the pools of Bethesda. And there are the ancient pools. And as you know, the pools of Bethesda is where the crippled man sat. And George said that it's a place for sick people to stay, and the first to enter in the morning would be healed. A crippled man there needed help to get into the pool, and I'd not thought about this before. But George said Jesus approached him, and the man didn't expect to walk. He just asked for help into the pools. He wasn't fixated on walking. He was fixated on his problem. And so we need to go to Jesus expectantly. Expectantly. That was amazing to me. Of course, there's the church there. You never know what you're gonna see on the streets of Jerusalem. Armed guards and smart cars.
Smart cars.
This is the Via Dolorosa. Did not put them all, but these are the stations of the cross. We walked the places to where Jesus would have fallen the first time, and then the second time when Simon took the cross. That's the largest mosque bell there. Those are the streets of Jerusalem. They drive on those. It's very narrow. On your left-hand side is an imprint in the wall to where they believe Jesus would have actually placed his hand when he went over to fall. That on your right would have been where Simon would have taken the cross for Jesus. More of the stations and things that happened on that Via Dolorosa on the day that Jesus was taken to the cross. We did stand in a place where the thorns would have been placed on his head. Because that was a very powerful, powerful moment. There's Sharon. And my sunglasses, which ended up in the picture. This is us going down to where I've lost it.
They think it's, this is the older,
Tomb.
site for the,
Yes, this is the one of two places. George said he didn't believe this was it because of the historical landscape. We didn't feel it. We didn't feel it there. I'll show you where we felt it earlier, but there are different entrances for different religions. You go in through the gate that is your religion.
That church and the church of his birth, it was taken over by multiple churches, at least 5. So they all had a time, and that first one where he was born, nativity, they had like a tree. You could be here from this time to this time. You could have it from this time to this time. So there's a lot of, it wasn't unity for sure.
Right, and those 5 denominations, I had written those down and got past it. It was Greek Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, Armenians, and Catholics are the 5 that share that. That's, this is a view from Mount Zion. And this is Caiaphas's house. This was my Bible study where I live. This is the pit that Jesus was dropped into. That's the thrashing floor where Jesus was beat. And then this is the pit that he was dropped into, and as we look above, and this is where he would have stayed his last night on earth. This is us in that pit. And then we went to the garden tomb to where we felt God's presence. Golgotha, or Skull Hill. This is looking up to Skull Hill or Golgotha to where they believe Jesus would have been crucified. The crucifixions happened along the side of the road because the Romans had to always put on a big show. They wanted you to see their hatefulness. And that's on the right-hand side is a view of the tomb from a distance, and that's me walking into the tomb. You can see, and they said that the ceiling was raised, or the entrance was raised so people could get in. So it was even smaller than that, but this is inside of that tomb. I believe Sharon and I went in together at that moment. But we did feel the presence, would have stayed there longer if time would allow. And then we were able to take the Lord's Supper there. And that was a very powerful moment as well. And then we go into the Old City Jerusalem for the second day, where we went to the Wailing Wall and the Temple Mount. And this is looking down at the Wailing Wall when we first went in. On the far side are the men, and on this side are the women. It's separated. And then this is the Temple Mount. We could not go in, only Muslim, Jewish, and Christians are not allowed inside. They washed their hands before prayer, and that was a fountain, and some of us were sitting on it, and the man came by and said, clean, clean. So we got up, they got up and moved, and he was actually cleaning it at that time, scrubbing it. These are the mosaics on the outside of that Temple Mound, a view from the gates of the Temple Mound. This is going down into the Wailing Wall. You had to pass security there to get into the Wailing Center. It's also,
Really?
yeah, we did.
You don't have to,
We
you go
did
from the Muslim side like I did.
Oh, you came from the other way, that's right, you left us.
Stuck underground.
You came from the tunnels, didn't you?
Yeah.
Accidentally.
Accidentally. But that is Jewish children there in the courtyard. They use it as a place for celebrations as well. A huge, enormous prayer library. This is the Wailing Wall itself. The only thing we had to do to show respect is if we did go up there, and I did. Danley and I kind of went together at that moment. I was amazed at these women. They stood there, never looked up from inside those books, in constant prayer. We had to, but to leave the Wailing Wall, you couldn't turn around and put your back to it. You had to walk this way. And then once you got back past everything, then you could turn it and walk away. Okay, this is on the outside of the south side of Jerusalem. That's looking on to those 80,000 graves that are there in the backdrop. So that's Pastor Lynn sitting there on, you can see those steps that are made to sit on. Interestingly enough, I, if you can't imagine, could not stay still at that time. So I was walking around and listening to whatever they were doing, and I got to that rough part right there, and Thomas was standing at the bottom and had to help me down. And about that time, George says, oh, and these were unlevel because this was the area of worship, and they left them unlevel so that when you got to that area, you had to slow down and take your time and get your mind right whenever you were going to worship. So they said those steps could have been steps that Jesus walked on. And I was drawn to them. That is one of the ritual pools. And then you can just see they're everywhere. Again, water, water, water. Go ahead.
So those steps are called the southern steps, and then right on the other side of that is a ton of mikvahs, which is the ceremonial baths. The southern steps is where Peter would have preached on the day of Pentecost, and then right next to it, slaughtered, of course, by God. You're going to preach, 3,000 people are going to get saved, some they need to be baptized. Right there is a whole bunch of pools baptized. So that was where the modern church was born, right there on those southern steps.
On this rock I will build my church. Amen. Thank you, Thomas. And then this, you can see the different architecture that's there. And looking up to the walls, you can just see the different levels that were built. And then this is headed to Qumran, which was the site of where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And I did write a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I will not take too much of your time, but the gentleman found 20 of them when he threw, and that is not the pottery that they were in, of course. It's man-made, to show what it would have been like. But see the caves that are up in the mountains? The gentleman was walking through there and threw a rock into the cave and heard a clink. And went inside and there was some pottery. And it was broken open and there were these writings. And so he took 20 of them and went into town and sold them for, he took 4 of them into town and sold them for $20. And then over time, there have been 225 biblical chapters found. And there were over 1,000 different scrolls found and remnants of 25,000 pieces that they've put together over time. Aqueducts, our group. And then here we are, yes, and we were at the Jordan. And it, again, was just amazing. I stepped down into that water and I didn't want to say to the group, I wanted to talk to the Lord, what my heart was feeling for him at that moment, but Brother Stan and Brother Lynn had to listen, so I stood there with them and then turned around and they dumped me along with, there were pretty much everybody who was there. We had 3 people who were baptized for the first time with us in the Jordan. It was absolutely, absolutely phenomenal. And then here's the guitar that I was telling you about. We all signed it around the edge. And I had mentioned to Mike, I said, you know, what if George's kids are musical? And he asked him, and he said, one of my sons is wanting to get into music and wanting to go to a music college. So we, Mike gifted that guitar to George, our tour guide. Yes, yes. Hoppa hoppa, shake a leg, what I need to do right now. So here we are on the plane, headed back, and I asked God to be able to help me to share